Okay, here we go. I'm going to make this quick and easy. This is me recording a session on the Cold War. This will refer to periods 2, period 6, and period 5. I'm sorry, 5 and 6. So I'm recording from the confines of my backyard. See, guys? See? Ha ha ha. See? That's what I'm talking about. A little bar back here. We're going to be recording from the bar. And just so you see, I'm not wasting time when I record. As I'm recording this, you all will see I'll be cooking a little food. Ha ha, baby. A little bar, got a little action here. So let's get to work and get this done. So you guys can follow along with the PowerPoint, okay? Follow along with the PowerPoint is probably the best thing, or your notes. So we're going to start with the first slide. And as we know, the issue of, oh boy, I messed up the slide already. So the whole issue of the Cold War was the Soviet Union and the United States have a philosophical difference over communism versus democracy. Our political ideologies were totally different. They like communism, we were democracy. So that's what it was all about. They controlled Eastern Europe. We were trying to control the free world. Everywhere else that has democracy. Now understand, the world doesn't remain free. There's going to be communism in Asia, communism all over, and we're going to do whatever we can to prevent the spread of communism. That's the whole idea, okay? In 1953, good old Lenin dies, and Russia was taken over by Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita is a man. And it was the Soviet Union. My apologies. Okay, so that's the first slide. It's really quick. It's stuff we've already learned. And the second slide as well. Second slide talks about the conferences, Yalta and Potsdam. In a nutshell, basically the conferences were to go over all the issues they had and figure out what they're going to do with Europe and Germany and how we're going to split everything up. So that's really what happens. And as we know, Germany split. So just so we're clear, Germany gets split and everything east becomes satellite nations for the Soviet Union. Winston Churchill famously quotes or says that an iron curtain had fallen on Eastern Europe, meaning nobody's getting in or out. So that's what's going on. Remember, Truman's policy was containment. Contain, contain, contain. Don't let communism spread. In addition, we'd love democracy to spread if we could. So that's the gist of the second slide. And remember, those two slides are kind of duplicates of war. You know, at the end of World War II, we kind of discussed those things. So I just wanted to touch on them briefly. All right, now we get into the heart of it. First thing that happens, 1947, there are communist uprisings in Greece and Turkey. As a result of those uprisings, we get involved because we want to keep democracy. And we do that, and we help. And that becomes known as the Truman Doctrine in 1947. A year later, and we had been planning this, we wanted to figure out what are we going to do with Europe so we don't have the same mistakes that occurred after World War I, where we didn't help rebuild and the country was in chaos. The Great Depression hit, and clearly Hitler it was a breeding ground for people like Hitler, someone charismatic that could convince the people he was going to make their lives better. So we have a thing called the Marshall Plan. Our Secretary of State, George Marshall, proposes billions of dollars in economic aid, approximately 12, I think it was a little more, of economic aid to Western Europe. And again, it was all of Europe. The Soviet Union declined. Czechoslovakia wanted money. The Soviets wouldn't let them take it. So, we really tried to rebuild all of Europe. Again, if we're rebuilding, people are becoming educated and maybe they'll want to remain free. Okay, then we have our first direct incident with the Soviet Union. In 1948, we had what was called the Berlin blockade. We were sending supplies into West Berliners. If you recall, Berlin was split into 4 quadrants. The west side and the east side. The west side was France, Great Britain, and the United States. The east was Soviets. But because Berlin is in the eastern part of Germany, it's on the Soviet side of Germany. So basically what happened is Stalin was not happy with us. We were sorry about the noise, construction, but I figure outside's the way to go. So we were giving supplies to everybody. Stalin got pissed and blocked all the roads coming into Berlin. So we start on our side, on the west side, but as we travel east towards Berlin, we hit the Soviet side of Germany. He blocked all those roads off. It became known as the Berlin blockade. Truman responded by saying this basically to Stalin, and we started with the Allies sending planes over all the time. I mean, every hour we were sending planes. A massive airlift was sent to send supplies to West Berlin, to the West Berliners. Eventually, Stalin lifted the blockade, and no more incident. As we move forward, the United States convinced all the Western powers to form an organization called NATO, okay? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, the purpose of NATO was to protect each other. So it was like a League of Nations, but specifically for the Western European nations. Canada was included, okay? Khrushchev, Stalin, who's still alive at the time, okay, is 1949, by the way. Stalin doesn't die till 53. So basically what happens next is Stalin says, all right, I'm going to do an alliance with the Eastern European satellites. It's going to be called the Warsaw Pact. And of course, they didn't have a choice. You remember, most of those governments were set up with a heavy-handed Russian military as far as forcing their hand in the elections. Okay, so that would be the next slide, okay? We are now going to move on to Chino's part of the world and any of my other wonderful Asian students, which I don't have a lot this year. So, containment in Asia, that's the next slide. I believe it's slide 131, it is. So first we're going to talk about China. In 1949, China has a communist uprising. Mao Zedong was the rebel leader of the communists who took on the nationalist who was our ally, Chiang Kai-shek. We, of course, supported Chiang Kai-shek. We lost. In 1949, mainland China becomes the world's most populated communist state. So we lose that. We flash forward a year and we see how the impact of the Soviet Union is on that part of the world, because, as we know, part of the Soviet Union is in Asia. So we have what's called the Korean War. The Northern Korean communists cross the 38th parallel. The 38th parallel is what separates North and South Korea. The North Korean communists cross south into southern Korea and go push the Koreans all the way back. The United Nations gets involved and sends a peacekeeping force to fight back. Now, one thing that's interesting here, the United Nations did not recognize China's communist overthrowing of the government. Therefore, they did not have a seat that was recognized in the United Nations. And Russia had their own issues right now. But regardless, the United Nations agreed to go in, send a force in to push the North Koreans back over the 38th parallel. They let General Douglas MacArthur be in charge of the forces. He was a general from World War II, if you remember. He was the head general in the Philippines, on our Pacific side. He actually famously left the Philippines early in the war when Japan took over and had a famous quote, "I shall return." This, if you remember, was a prelude right before the Bataan Death March. Anyways, getting back to Korea. So our UN forces go in, and UN being all the countries that were in the UN, okay? Everybody, I mean, not the Soviets. Our UN forces go in. We end up pushing the North Koreans back across the 38th parallel, basically almost into China. We push them into the Yuli River, which borders China. As a result, China gets nervous, and China now sends troops in. So now we have a lot more troops fighting. The Korean War went like that for about 3 years, and the bottom line was that nothing really changed by the end of the war. Once the armistice or ceasefire, so an armistice is a ceasefire or stop fighting, was signed, it was about the same spot as the 38th parallel, not exact but close. So just understand that an armistice was signed, and it was signed in a village called Panmunjom, which was near the 38th parallel, which still today is the DMZ, or demilitarized zone. And to some people, it's considered the most dangerous place on earth. You have South Korean and North Korean troops facing off against each other with nothing between them. It's the border between their two countries. What else? During the war, just as a side note, General MacArthur wanted to pursue the Vietnamese into China. Truman did not allow that, did not want that. I guess he didn't want another war. We just came out of World War II. MacArthur criticized Truman. Truman fires MacArthur. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide, which is the home front during the Cold War. Okay, now, the home front is all about something that happened during World War I in this country. Red Scare. Here we go again. Yes, we have that wonderful Red Scare. The fear of communism spreading throughout our country. That's going on like crazy now. So, what goes on at home is very simple, okay? Truman starts by setting up these loyalty review boards. The loyalty review boards, oh, sorry, someone's passing. I want to see if I had to yell at a neighbor. In a good way, of course. Loyalty review boards were set up to investigate government employees who were suspected of un-American activities. You know, remember I've said this back then. It was a very white, patriotic type of culture in our country. So anybody that spoke bad or off about the United States was considered a communist. Gotta love that, right? So, the loyalty review boards were set up to do that, to look into people with un-American activities, whatever the hell that means. Of course, that's, in today's day, everybody has un-American thoughts every now and then. At least 60% of our country has un-American thoughts about our president, right? Anyways, there were several people that were spies. We had plenty of spies in this country. One gentleman named Alger Hiss was in the State Department. He was a Russian spy. Then we had Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in 1950, a couple that was accused and convicted of furnishing atomic secrets to the Russians. They were executed. They were tried and executed. But the big push for this Red Scare and the big hysteria creator was Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. Crazy-ass senator from Wisconsin who claimed to have a list of Soviet spies in our government. Of course, he never produced them. And he would go on TV all the time on the radio just threatening everybody and talking about everybody's a communist. And he was just out of control. Finally, he went after the army and accused them of sheltering communists. And basically, that was his downfall when he went after the army. That really was his downfall. You know, they asked him for proof and for the list and all that. He couldn't come up with anything. So eventually he is condemned, censored, whatever you want to call it, wanders off in the sunset, and he's done. But he had a 3-year run where he was pretty popular for 3 years and one of the most important figures, or at least popular figures, whether it's for negative or positive. Okay, that's another slide done. See, the Cold War, it's a quick section, guys. This is an easy one for you. It's easy. That's what she said. Okay, I had to throw one in. It hadn't come up with it yet. And that wasn't a great one. I apologize, classes. Okay, next. Okay, so now we only have a couple slides left. How cool is that? So we're going to talk about the Cold War under Eisenhower and Kennedy. Okay, first we have what was called the Eisenhower Doctrine, okay? Now, if you don't remember, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the general of the Allied forces in World War II and was the one who oversaw Operation Overlord, otherwise known as D-Day, or the invasion of Normandy. Not 71st Street clowns. Normandy, the beaches of France. Anyways, so basically Eisenhower started by helping, guess who? The French, because they were fighting communism in Vietnam and Indochina. So, once again, we're helping the French. What a shock. Now, next, an incident in 1956 that happened. Britain, Great Britain, Israel, and France basically took over the Suez Canal from Egypt. And Eisenhower did not want that. We wanted to keep allies in the Mideast and democracy in the Mideast. So we needed to get involved. The Suez Canal was also very important for trade. It led out to the sea, and it connected to many oceans. I believe it was the Arctic Sea it led out to. But it was very important to have the Suez Canal with the Mideast and with Egypt and not controlled just by one or two nations. We weren't going to have that. We wanted open free trade. So that was known as the Eisenhower Doctrine, preventing them from defeating Egypt. That would be Britain, Israel, and France. In 1957, is when he came up, when he actually said it was the Eisenhower Doctrine. The incident happened in 56. You remember, everything ties in together. That's the beauty of history. Everything flows or happens together or keeps flowing. In 1957, the Soviets got our attention by launching Sputnik, the first man-made satellite into space. Nikita Khrushchev, as we know, was the leader. And this freaked out the Americans because we were convinced that if they launched satellites into space, eventually they were going to be able to send missiles, shoot missiles at us from space. So what happened? Guess what happened? Can you guys take a guess? So Dwight Eisenhower started something down here in Florida that became enormous, huge. It was huge. That's what she said again. Thank you. But guess what we started? Can you guess? Think about satellites. Hopefully some of you got it. Second period. You better get it. Santiago, Isa, you guys, Danielle, if you guys don't know this, we have a problem. Let's see, fifth. Who's going to know it in fifth? Oh, God. Fifth. You're killing me, fifth. Well, Alex, you should know it. Janine, maybe. Frank, Francisco, some of you guys should know this. And sixth period, you guys better know it, okay? I don't want to hear any nonsense. My sixth period, well, other than the slower kids like, Fred might take a little while to get it into his brain, but you guys will teach him, right? Okay, anyways, so enough of my shots. So we started NASA, our space program, NASA. Boom, 1958, Eisenhower starts it. Okay, so let's move on. What else is going on with communism? In 1959, for all of my balseras y balseros, Fidel Castro took over Cuba. He overthrew the dictator Batista, okay? And not Batista the wrestler, okay? Clowns. Batista was the dictator in Cuba in the 59. He was our ally. And, of course, Fidel promises free elections, never happens. He institutes a communist dictatorship and runs the country forever, basically, and now his brother, Okay, so what happens in Latin America? Because we have some incidents throughout the Cold War. In 1961, our CIA trains a bunch of Cuban exiles to go in and take over. Unfortunately, Kennedy was not aggressive enough, and we were softening it up for them to land, but we didn't soften them up enough. And unfortunately, the insurrection was defeated. Castro remained in power. Then in 1962, we had the incident that was most likely the closest we ever became to nuclear war with the Soviet Union. It was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. Many of you have heard of it. Oh, let me step back. I apologize. I don't know if I mentioned in 1961 that incident was referred to as the Bay of Pigs because that's where the exiles landed, in the Bay of Pigs. Anyways, so therefore, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Our satellite planes detected missile sites being built in Cuba, okay? Cuban missile sites. And Kennedy did not like that. By the way, I'm walking just to flip my ribs. Don't be scared. Kennedy had a problem with that. So what did we do? We put an embargo and we blockaded all of Cuba. We made sure nothing in, nothing out. And so now we had to make sure that the Soviets understood we were serious, which they did. And that was really the closest they ever became to nuclear war. Now, understand this. We did make concessions. For the Cuban Missile Crisis to end, there were concessions made. And you could probably see it in your notes. But basically, we agreed to remove our missile sites from Turkey, and we did it on the quiet. We didn't want anybody knowing that we caved in. We removed our missile sites from Turkey if the deal was that they would remove their missile sites from Cuba. So that's what happened, and that's what came to be known as the Cuban Missile Site Crisis. And it really freaked out our nation. In fact, people in America were building bomb shelters, doomsdayers. We had all that back then because we thought that the Russians were going to invade the United States. So anyways, that is what is known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Again, we're doing everything quickly as we know because we have a lot to cover. And you need to understand the generally what happened in history. In 1961, Nikita Khrushchev ordered the construction of the Berlin Wall. The whole purpose was to prevent the East Germans from escaping. Remember, East Germany wasn't getting rebuilt. West Germany, we had the Marshall Plan. So we're rebuilding all these democratic societies, so things are looking good. And remember, it's not like you couldn't see. There was a fence, and you could see across. And, the East Berliners wanted freedom, so they were escaping. So the wall went up to prevent the further escape. Okay, let's go on some more. So that's another slide, 133. Yep, we're going to the next slide, 134. Okay. So basically, this is the last slide of the lesson with regard to the Cold War. and it talks about 1947, Everglades National Park was created. 1949, the U.S. Air Force acquired Cape Canaveral. I assume you've heard of Cape Canaveral. That's where we send our rocket ships, we're NASA. And then, of course, in 1958, we know President Eisenhower established NASA. We were nervous because, the Russians got Sputnik, blah, blah, blah. Then in, what else? 1963, we acquired even more land on Merritt Island and became renamed to the Kennedy Space Center. So that's a nutshell of the Cold War. I'm going to post this on Edmodo so you all can watch it and learn. And the next section for you guys will be post-war prosperity and civil rights. I hope you guys are having a great time being off. I'm sure you are. And I'm just going to say to you, see, I was going to jump in the pool, but I'm not. It's too shiny. Oh, everybody say hi to Stella. Hold on real quick. Stella, say hi, Stella. Everybody, that's Stella. Where is she? There she is. Hey, Stella, say hi, Dum-Dum. Say hi, Dum-Dum. Here comes Dum-Dum. Okay, hey, Stella. Okay, well, I'm out. Till next time.